sabbaticals interest me. In part because they're a thing many churches send their pastors on, and I work with a lot of pastors, so it comes up. But I'm also interested in them because I'm interested in how groups of people grow and change together. Ministry sabbaticals come with a lot of opportunities for growth and change, both for the congregation and the pastor. In Season 1, I was able to share 2 conversations with Pastor James Downing, one each before and after his sabbatical. And here in Season 2, I'll get to share more. I'll begin with William Woody, pastor of Solid Rock Church in Grants Pass, whose sabbatical was planned for and executed very differently than James's. In the book of Mark, chapter 2, verse 27, Jesus is recorded as saying, "Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." So if you're thinking about a sabbatical, either taking one or resourcing someone else's, I hope this interview stirs the waters of your imagination a little for what a sabbatical should, and I say this in quotes, look like. William and I sat down at a local coffee shop. Here's our conversation. How did you know it was time to take a sabbatical?
Well, the short answer would be, I won't stick to the short answer, but the short answer would be that I was tired, like bone weary, tired, not just physically tired. In fact, physically I felt really good. Physically, I felt like I was doing fine, but mentally, just exhausted. Emotionally pretty wrung out, and spiritually fatigued. And it was the spiritual fatigue was the pouring out and pouring out and pouring out and pouring out, and I wasn't out of that level of spiritual fatigue. I was
be right there.
Not able to fill myself up enough to where I was giving people the overflow. What I was giving was what I needed to be sustained and to be encouraged and fed and filled. So a ministry lesson I had learned really early on was that what people need to be getting from me is the overflow, not what I needed to just remain filled. And so I knew it was time for sabbatical when I couldn't get filled. And so therefore there was no overflow to give. So then to give anything required it to be that which should have been just free, just to be. And so when I reached that point and found myself in that place, sabbatical became a necessity. My wife did an amazing job of, she knows me well enough to know that if she told me I had to, then I wouldn't. But if she went it's a personality trait that I will fight, I'm sure, for the rest of my life. Funny for somebody who served in the military and worked in law enforcement and everything else is that come to find out I don't like to be told what to do.
Anti-authoritarian.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I've got an anti-authoritarian bent to me, and I think some of it comes with skepticism of authority. But are they looking out for my best interest or anything else? And so part of it was with my wife knowing that she's always looking out for my best interest. That as she kept kind of pushing into it with me of, I think this is important, I think you need to do this, I think it's really crucial for you to pursue this, it became a convincing thing for me. So that was the biggest thing is experiencing not burnout, but fatigue to a point to where I think that sometimes those can kind of mesh together a little bit, to be burnout and to be experiencing that kind of fatigue. I think they can mesh, but what I have found before, because when I was in law enforcement, I went through a season of burnout. And because it's not just something limited to ministry, it's something that ties into everything. And in law enforcement, I went through a season of burnout. And with burnout, there's a lot of, my experience has been, there's a lot of similarities with burnout and depression. Like I can't. It's like I can't, I don't want to, and maybe that anti-authoritarian thing, you can't make me. And so that wasn't the same for me in ministry, on the ministry side of things. And this is my experience. I'm not trying to say this is what everybody should experience.
Yeah.
My experience was, while there could have been a layer of burnout in it, it was more just simply fatigue. Because for me, it was the want to do it. I wanted to. I just didn't have it in me to do it. So the drive was there, the motivation was there, the desire was there. But it was like one of those things where it's like, you want to, and you just can't.
Yeah. Are there any examples of moments or scenarios that would be okay to share where you were like, man, like, I don't know, that's not there, or to kind of exemplify, like, with it, like needing to write a sermon and just not wanting to, or needing to do a counseling session and just feeling like you just are not the same in it anymore.
And what I would probably put it to, which I know contextually wouldn't work unless someone was a part of the conversation we had last week at the prayer breakfast that Tyler led, or that time that Tyler led. Unless they knew that, they probably wouldn't get this right off the bat. But what I would say, or part of what I would say, is that that fourth, which I don't remember the descriptor for it.
Four reasons for burnout.
Yeah, and the fourth one was basically it seems as though it's going to be too hard, basically. I can't remember what that was called exactly.
Fear of difficulty. Or
fear of difficulty.
Inability to cope with difficult situations.
Yeah, and so for me, that was kind of that was one of the areas or ways I understood and knew kind of where I was at. Because the other three resounded with me in the sense of I could see that, but they didn't really resound with me like when Tyler was talking about it and sharing it. They resounded with me, but they were like, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I could, But that was one that I could look at and say, cool. For the last 2 years, that's been me.
You kept waiting for things to get easier.
I did. I kept waiting for, and honestly, a huge amount of it falls into that category of. A huge amount of it falls into that category of when I just did it, it was fine.
Right.
But I had reached a point where I had previously been at least able to like put down on a piece of paper and be like, okay, this morning I'm working on this, but this afternoon I'm going to make these phone calls. I'm going to call and talk to these people. And I would put that down. And I had worked for years with the ability to be able to say, cool, starting at 2 o'clock this afternoon or 3 o'clock this afternoon, these are the 3 phone calls I need to make today. I want to make them, check in with this person, see how they're doing, see what's going on in their life, see if it would seems beneficial to visit them, connect with them, go have coffee with them, whatever. And where I found myself was I would do the things up to that point, and when it got to that point, of the phone call, then I would immediately become overwhelmed. And that overwhelmed came from the voice in my head that wasn't God's voice, but that voice in my head that basically started throwing out the imposter syndrome type things of, or if you call them, all they're gonna do is tell you how terrible you are and how you obviously don't care and you obviously this and obviously that. And so too often I just believed that voice and was like, well, the easy way to avoid having that conversation is just to avoid having the conversation at all. Guess that didn't happen. And honestly, for me, I noticed that a lot happening during 2020.
Yeah.
That time which shall not be named in 2020. In 2021.
It's too soon.
It's too soon, yeah. During that time is when I really recognized that happening more for me. And so, sabbatical they talk about is, about 7 years in is when, I verse every 7 years. So based off of Sabbath and a Sabbath view of like, cool, every 7 years take sabbatical. My 7 years landed in 2020.
Yeah.
And so there was the fearful, prideful part of me that felt as though it was impossible for me to actually take sabbatical in 2020 because that would be leaving my church at this dire moment.
Yeah.
In hindsight, that would have been the perfect time to do it. And to come back from that rejuvenated at a time frame where the church needed an energetic pastor who was there to say, cool, let's go.
Yeah.
Instead, what they got was about 2 years of an exhausted pastor saying, I'll do what I can.
Yeah.
But it ain't going to be a lot.
So 2023 was a little bit overdue, it seemed like.
Yeah. 2020. Basically, by the time I took sabbatical, it was past the time frame where I should have. And now the debate within the church at this point in time, within the leadership in the church body at this point in time, the it's not a bitter debate. It's just the conversation that's happening right now is cool. So you should have taken one at 7 years. You took one at 10 instead. So do we insist on you taking one at 14 years?
Right.
And that puts you back on the cycle.
Yeah.
Or is it now 7 years from when you took one at 10?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the conversation that's happening right now. And I say conversation, it's come up a couple times.
Yeah.
It's not ongoing. It's not every time we get together. It's like, well, what are we going to do now?
Well, you brought your congregation into the picture. As you look back on prepping for the sabbatical and kind of making your plans, talking about it with the congregation, what are some kind of takeaways or reflections on just that leading up to the sabbatical process? I mean, you realize it was time, which is important. Your wife was kind of being a champion of you getting that. But what other things, as you think about?
Well, and my wife alone wasn't a champion. She was the main driving force in the sense of she's the one that kept the conversation in front of not me and others. But in the end, it was a loving and gracious congregation that was the, yes, we want this for you. Yes, we think this is important for you. Yes, we think it's necessary for you.
Yeah. And he recommended, like, hey, if you're listening to this, fellow pastoral colleague, do this or don't do this, based on your own experience of helping shepherd your congregation into entering a sabbatical with you.
So one of the things I would suggest absolutely is make it intentional conversation, not just with leadership, but with the body itself, as to the importance of it, the necessity of it. If you have to,
was that like Sunday morning time?
yeah, I actually preached through right before I went on sabbatical. So the four Sundays before I went on sabbatical, I preached on, because I'm a Baptist pastor in alliteration, I preached on stillness, silence, solitude, and study.
Okay.
And so one subject matter each week, and then provided to the church like examples of how they could do that in their own life, but also talked a lot through like, this is what I will be doing. This is the pattern. This is the rhythm. This is the rhythm of my sabbatical. And so there will be in it stillness. The purpose of mine, so like there's guys that go on sabbatical to go write books. There's guys that go on sabbatical. I had a friend of mine who went on one this last summer, and his purpose of going on sabbatical was a combination of some rest, but then also part of the reason he went on sabbatical was to revision for his church. And so that when he came off of sabbatical, he could basically sit down and say, this is what I've come up with, and through prayer and study and study and context and everything else. And so he spent quite a bit of his time on sabbatical. I haven't talked to him, so I don't know how much or whatever, but I know the plan was for him to take quite a bit of the time on his sabbatical and study his community, the church itself, kind of church movements in that sense, and establish like this is us moving forward.
Yeah.
And so that was like the purpose of his sabbatical, was some rest, but also a purpose of revisioning. For me, the entire purpose of my sabbatical, by direction and encouragement from the leadership of our church and the church body itself, was restorative rest.
Yeah.
There was no, like, okay, when you come back, you better have all your ducks in a row and everything better look perfect and everything better look great. Like, literally the end goal was, when you come back, we hope that you are rested.
Yeah.
Like, that was it. So the zero expectations side of it, if I was, especially if you're a pastor, if someone's a pastor who is struggling, tired, in that bone-weary fatigue element of things. Again, it doesn't mean physically, but like the mentally, emotionally, spiritually, just wrung out.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably more common right now after all of the COVID years and all of that. I think that's more common now. And so if I was a pastor in that context, I would 100% encourage, like, make your sabbatical about restorative rest.
Yeah.
And for me, I guess one of the things that I would say that I've been, I don't even know if wrestling with it is the right way of describing it. I think it's more of a recognizing for quite a while that we're doing this wrong. And like not in a critical way or an attacking way.
And what's this?
The church.
The church is doing what? Ministry or
yes.
sabbaticals or okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Everything.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
Pretty much you could go almost A to B and say we're doing it wrong. We're making it so much about ourselves. We're making it so much about our performance. We're making it so much about performance as a whole. We're making it so much about appeal. We're making it so much about that. Lost in all of it, where we are using Jesus as a gimmick, a ploy, a tool, almost in my mind. And again, I understand the broad sweepingness of these statements and the repercussions of a broad sweeping statements like this.
Sure,
but, I truly believe and not in specificity, like this church is this church is this, but just across the board, our practices are such that we are either establishing a constant setup of bait and switch, come and we will love you and support you and encourage you. Oh, by the way, here's Jesus.
Right.
Or a sense of, if you want to understand what moral superiority looks like, come and spend time with us, and we will teach you with a level of arrogant humility as to what this looks like. And for me, it's one of those things where, we use the statistic a lot, or you see the statistic a lot of, divorce in the church is just as prevalent as it is in the culture, almost identical in numbers. And now that's crazy. At the same time as that, moral failure, not that you see that secularly as far as, but you do at a point in time, because you see people all the time that are losing their jobs because they've done something, they've stole from the company, they've done something that, what's the word I'm looking for, that discredits the company that they worked for or something like that, and they get fired for it. You see that kind of thing happen all the time, and I don't know what the statistics number would look, but I would say it would probably be pretty similar when you get into those who are in, I'll just call it upper management, executive level type things. I would almost say that the numbers would probably be pretty comparable, because as we as a culture have created the office of pastor, as such, it's seen as upper management, executive level type position. So I think if you were to take some comparative look, I think that you would see that both of them point to the frailty of mankind, or the frailty of the human nature.
Kind of like the divorce statistic, kind of seeing that. The failure rate is probably about the same.
They're about the same, and I think the moral failure, if you can quantify moral failure in two completely different contexts, I think if you were to quantify those, I think you would find the number to be pretty similar.
Yeah.
So
pretending we're better because
how are we different? And so for me, that's become a lot of the question is, okay, how are we different? Because so much of pastoral ministry is based off of performance. How many people are you bringing in? How many people are listening to your sermons? How many people are listening to, hey, if you have a pastor, do you have a podcast? How many people are listening to your podcast? How many people are reading your blog? How many people are this? How many Facebook followers do you have? How many Instagram followers do you have? How many social media connections do you have? How many conferences do you go and speak at? How many things are you invited to go and be a part of? And it's like, and all of it's based off of, and again, intermixed in all of that is how's your church growing? Now, the growing in that context is 100% numeric. How many people are you bringing in?
I'm curious if these reflections, I was thinking I wanted to talk about leading up to sabbatical, sabbatical, and then kind of post-sabbatical reflections. And I'm kind of curious, what you're sharing right now, are these just kind of general Pastor William thoughts, or did these kind of come out of...
They came out of sabbatical. So a lot of them were seeds that had been planted a long time ago that during sabbatical. So something weird I did on sabbatical, I completely acknowledge its weirdness. I do not put it as rightness or wrongness. I know that I did the right thing, and that if you don't do this, you're doing it wrong. I don't put that out there at all in any capacity whatsoever. My plan had been, as I went on sabbatical, my plan had been to go and worship at some other local congregations. I didn't go to church at all for 10 of the 12 weeks that I was on sabbatical. I didn't go anywhere. I went fishing with my family a couple times. I was traveling. I didn't go to church anywhere. What it became the first couple of weeks was just the simple...
Because it can't.
I don't have to go to church today, and I think that there is a sense of relief in that. I honestly do. I think that there's a sense of it in the ministry sense. If you are a ministry, if you're in vocational ministry, I think that there is an element that has to be acknowledged of the fact of, we've heard the statements all the time, like Jesus took vacations, Jesus did this, Jesus did this. And one of the things that has always come to mind for me is one really glaring thing is none of us are Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if he needed to, why in the world are we so arrogantly prideful to think that we don't?
Right.
And, you go through the book of Acts, and as you read through the book of Acts, you see what you're dealing with is you're dealing with decades of activity in 28 chapters. I mean, you're talking decades that have occurred. So in that time, in the book of Acts, what you're not getting the same 3-year intimacy that you get in 24 chapters of Luke or 28 chapters of Matthew or 16 chapters of Mark or was it 21 chapters of John. In like the Gospels, you've got this intimate look at Jesus, which is beautiful and wonderful, and I love it. In Acts, what you have is more of a like flyover overview with a few intimate moments of like, hey, after an undisclosed amount of time, this occurred. After an undisclosed amount of time, this occurred.
Right.
After an undisclosed amount, it's like, and so you get these drop-ins in what you're dealing with. Well, in that time frame, I am one who would say, okay, I think it's fair to say, at least after the first 10 or 11 chapters of Acts, that Peter is kind of the focus of that first 10 or 11 chapters, and then after that, Paul becomes pretty much the focus. But I think in that, by their actions that you see in those little glimpses, I think in those actions, I think you see with Peter and I think you see with Paul that their hearts were devoted to the pattern that Jesus followed. And there were numerous times where the desire that Jesus had, because he was Jesus, it wasn't always fulfilled. But how many times do we see, before Sabbatical, I was preaching through the Gospel of Mark, and so many times through the Gospel of Mark, there were the times where Jesus wanted to get his disciples away so they could recover and rest and kind of debrief, and like he wanted to get away, and then the people would show up, and Jesus would like step between the people and his disciples and be like, let me teach you, let me help you, let me support you, let me this, let me that. And then like the next thing would be like, and then he sent his disciples across.
I never noticed
so they could get away. And then it's like, and then he would catch up to them. He'd send everybody home, and then he caught up to them. And then it's like, so you see those types of patterns in it of where his desire for them was, you're going to need rest. But what we have built ministry around is this view, and I don't know how to break the pattern other than just to do things that are completely so counter to the ministry culture. It's like you asked me this morning of like, to have a busy morning. No, I didn't.
Yeah.
No, I didn't have a busy morning. Because I don't think we're meant to. I think and again, we live in it, so it's not me throwing rocks at it per se.
Yeah.
But I think the American culture would love for me to have a busy morning.
Yeah.
Okay, what time do I go to work?
Yeah.
I go to work when I get to work.
Yeah.
And I'm really kind of always at work, because I may find myself sitting in my living room at my house at 5:30 in the morning looking at Scripture going, wow, okay. That is a paradigm shifting way of looking at the gospel and how it applies to my life and how it can apply to the lives of others. Like, hey, that's paradigm shifting, and I'm going to spend the next half hour, 45 minutes to an hour either writing about that or just reflecting on it and praying through, okay, Lord, help me to lead others in this same way. Okay, so do I go and punch into my time clock and say, okay, I just spent 45 minutes doing this? Or do I just understand the fact that, okay, I'm on all the time?
Yeah.
And therefore, that is why, without it being a law unto me, that's why Sabbath becomes important.
Yeah.
That's why a day of saying, okay, Lord, I'm going to rest in you today.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes it doesn't need to be a day. Sometimes it needs to be 2.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it needs to be 12 weeks
Right.
of just saying, Lord, I'm going to rest in you for the next 12 weeks.
So what else did that? You mentioned how you had a plan for sabbatical. One of them was to go to different churches. Mm-hmm. That kind of got changed. But how else, I don't know, reflect a bit more on whether it's plans that you had and how they work themselves out, or just spend a little bit of time reflecting on what did the actual 12 weeks look like? How did you spend that time, and any takeaways, or
so a lot of it,
make sure you do or make sure you don't do? Any reflections too on like that didn't work out so well, or
one of the things I would say is for anybody, as far as a general sense of encouragement, because I would be reluctant to call it advice, but I would say encouragement is, if you have some things that you know that you love to do, make that an intentional part of your sabbatical.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I have always loved to do, but I had forgotten that I loved to do, is travel. I love to travel. Mm-hmm. I love to just go. Mm-hmm. And so the first Sunday of my sabbatical was Father's Day. Mm-hmm. The first week, as far as first Sunday, was Father's Day. So we went fishing. And we went up, and we actually went the Saturday before. We went up and went to Diamond Lake, and it was mosquito central, man. It was crazy. Uh-huh. So we drove back down to Lost Creek Lake and fished a little bit there. Didn't really have much luck or anything else. And then Sunday got up and went up to Spalding Pond, fished up there, had a great time, had just a blast. All three of our daughters were able to catch fish and enjoy themselves and just have a great time, and just had a blast. And just enjoyed the heck out of that. And then the next week, I traveled up to Washington, where my folks live, and just me and Isabel and my dog.
Isabel
is our youngest.
Okay.
Yeah, she was 6 at the time. She's 7 now, but she was 6 at the time. So just me and her and our dog, and my dog, and traveled up to my folks and hung out up there for a week. Went up while we were there. One of the days that we were up there, we went up to my favorite place I've ever been on Earth, which is a little mountain lake up in the area I grew up in, Cooper Lake, and you look out over the mountains, and there's snow-covered mountains. The lake itself isn't a reservoir; it's an actual just old mountain lake, full of old trees that have floated in and sunk and everything, and it doesn't allow any kind of motorized boat on it. And so the water is crystal clear, just beautiful. It's gorgeous. So we went up there and hung out for the day and picnicked and just had a great day. Isabel got to swim in the lake and realize why it is that it's not a super popular thing to go swim in these high mountain lakes that are glacier fed.
Because it's cold, I'm guessing.
She changed into her swimsuit, and she was just like, this is going to be great. She wandered in and got about knee deep and was like, this is so cold.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. And so she swam a little bit, waded around in it and splashed around.
Traveling in, some rekindling of kind of old passions or fun things.
And so then we did that.
Family.
Yeah, so did that, spent time with family, just a lot of time with family. A lot of time solitude, a lot of time where everybody went to work, and we set up Isabel when I was home and everything. Set up Isabel to go to the WISE summer program, so I had the days to myself, and
just kind of stream of consciousness, kind of like, I think I'll do this or do that, or did you have a
didn't have a
I'm
plan.
going to read this
No
book
plan.
or
no plan.
Yeah,
no plan at all. One, I'm not a planner.
Yeah.
In fact, I hate planning.
Yeah.
like viscerally hate planning.
Did anything surprise you?
So it doesn't feed me. Planning doesn't feed me at all. It's It's necessary, and I understand its necessity, and I appreciate it for its necessity. But there is no part of a planning process that feeds me.
Sure. You did a bit to make sure that you had that space. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
During that time, kind of multiple days of solitude, like, what did that look like? What surprised you? What, I mean, oftentimes when you're doing that kind of quote unquote work, you bump into boredom. You bump into
I bumped into boredom.
Then you start bushwhacking your way into that's what's there's that thing hiding in that.
So here's what I would say. I would say that there were several times that I bumped into boredom. I would say, in a sense of a level of transparency, there were times that boredom led me down roads I didn't need to go down, or places I didn't need to go to. But even through that, what I was learning through it all was a depth of understanding of the relationship with the Lord that exists. Not that can exist, but that does exist. And so, we've got a son who's an active duty Marine. He doesn't always make choices that we as his parents are like, that was awesome.
Sure.
That was a great choice. That was I am so glad so glad that you did that.
Yeah.
And yet as his father, as his parents, there's never a time that we would even think to say, how dare you? You're not even our son anymore. All we do is look at that and go, yeah, I wouldn't really wish that choice on you. Would wish that you would hope that you would do better. And, but however, there's always moving forward. And so for me, a lot of it was having grown up with a really good set of parents. But also, as that really good set of parents, having grown up with a really good dad. A lot of that time, and including that time of venturing into territory I didn't belong. Nobody belongs. But I didn't belong in that territory.
Yeah.
Coming out of it with an understanding that, as I come back to the Lord in a humble confession and even confusion, that Romans 7 confusion. I don't know why I do the things that I do. I do the things I don't want to do. That kind of Romans confusion. And coming back to God in that, and to an extent, I would say, even coming back with kind of that, recording-wise, the visual can't be there, but kind of that hands in front of your face, kind of a coming back and saying, okay, hey, I screwed up.
Yeah.
I've made mistakes. And coming back like, I'm ready to take what you're going to give me, and to experience in that moment the embrace of God. And to, instead of receiving I wouldn't even say instead of receiving wrath, I would say instead of receiving chastisement, to instead get that same sense of comfort and peace, while at the same time understanding that if I was hearing an audible voice, that audible voice would be saying, not really what you thought it was going to be, was it? Didn't really get out of that what you thought you were going to get out of that.
Yeah.
Not really. That experience wasn't as fulfilling as, or whatever it may be. And again, that goes for anything. That goes for, I realized that I wanted to be eating a strict diet, and I would go and buy a bunch of garbage and gorge myself on a bunch of garbage, and then all of a sudden it would be at the end of that. It's like
well, that was the
little arm around you, going, "How's that feeling?"
Yeah,
without any condescension, without any, but like hey, probably didn't turn out the way you thought it was going to, huh? Yeah. See that feeling you were chasing? This is what that feels like, and so for me, I would say that was I would call that a huge part of the whole thing, was learning that, and learning that it's like, wow. And so part of it was a journey I've been on for a while, a few years now, which is reconciling of the term I hate using, but I'll use it anyways, because I think it fits. I just don't like the implications of it a lot of times, and maybe that's part of the problem. I don't like the implications because but having grown up with a very American version of Christianity, so the whole tended towards legalism, tended towards a very morality-based type of model that I've been exploring now it's been a few years now of a journey of exploring the idea of being, not that you can be, but that if you are in Christ, you are the beloved of God. And then exploring that idea that there's nothing more that you can do to cause God to love you more, and there's nothing that you can do that would cause him to love you less, that he loves you perfectly. And so then it's not performance-based. And so for me, it's been a lot of the questions I found myself asking a lot during Sabbatical that were the questions I wanted some answers to as I came out of it. And I won't say that I got those, but I would say I got closer. What were some patterns of my life that weren't beneficial? They weren't not only beneficial for me, but they weren't beneficial for me as a shepherd. And so shepherding, the exploration of shepherding in that sense is Psalm 23 gives you the model of shepherding, leading to green fields, leading to still water, leading to places of protection, that even in the midst of hardship or terrible or, valley of the shadow of death, even in those moments, the shepherd, the good shepherd, is leading you through those with confidence. And the confidence is you're okay. You're going to be okay. And so for me, a lot of it was what normal patterns of behavior, patterns of the way I do my job, quote unquote, are not a biblical model of what it looks like to shepherd a flock, to pastor. One that I found was a pattern that I have fallen into really easy because of my past, because of my life, which is I've always gone to a place to go to work. And so I have found it very easy to go to my office, and I work in my office, and when I'm done with my work day, I go home from my office, and that is the pattern. And to venture outside of that then becomes that trait number 4 of, okay, that's the unusual. The office is the usual, it's the normal, this is the safe pattern. I go to work, I come home. I go to work, I come home. I go to work, I come home, just like I was punching a clock. And what I had noticed before sabbatical, and I've ran into a couple of times since I've been back, but not enough to recognize it and enough to go, nope, this isn't the pattern. And one of the things was a very punch the clock mentality, which is, okay, I've actually gotten everything done that I had set out to do today. I'd gotten all the work accomplished that I had set out to do today. I don't really have anything else to do, but it's only 2:30. So I guess I'll just sit here for another hour and a half.
Right.
And waste time.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's like, why?
Yeah.
For what purpose? What is being accomplished in that? Could I spend that hour and a half reading a book that that I've wanted to look through? Absolutely. But like one of the things I'm learning, I'm not fully there yet, but I'm getting better at, is to say, or what does it look like to say, okay, my eyes are tired from looking at a computer and reading all day long and taking notes and doing all this. So what does it look like instead to say, cool, I'm going to put in my headphones or put on my headphones or put in my earbuds, and I'm going to listen to a book that I've wanted to engage with for a long time. Yeah. But I'm going to listen to it instead of reading it. And I might go for a walk while I do that or something. And so for me, that was probably a lot of it. The other side of it is, I had went into sabbatical with a level of concern because of other experiences that I had read about and heard about and everything. And that is, the pastor that goes on sabbatical, comes off sabbatical, and like comes to his church and is like, yeah, cool, I'm out. Either while they were on sabbatical, they went and candidated somewhere else, or they went on sabbatical and realized, you know what, I don't actually want to pastor anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. This is hard, and I don't want to do it anymore. I'm out. And so there was a level as I went on, because of the fact of where I was, of just so bone-weary, tired.
Yeah.
There was a level of concern that
You're going to find that
go
out.
on sabbatical, and I'm going to, like, partway through my sabbatical or all the way through my sabbatical, I'm going to be like, you know what, I actually don't
it's nice not working at a church.
Not working at a church. And, if I were to go get another job that's just hey, there's all these different things out there now where you can remote work and work very limited hours and do very limited amounts. And I love traveling. And so maybe I could just figure out a way to do something where I could just be traveling all the time and, and whatever else and blah, 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 thing.
Yeah.
So I went into that with a level of apprehension.
Yeah.
A little level of anxiety, I guess you would say, of like, okay, Lord, I don't want. And so what occurred with me shortly before I went on sabbatical was I experienced some things where God revealed his presence with you. One of the ways he showed himself was two things. One was some of the most unlikely people who had been attending our church sporadically for a number of years. So they would attend for, several weeks in a row, and then we just wouldn't see them for a season. And all of a sudden they would come back and attend for several weeks in a row, and then we wouldn't see them for a season. And they'd come back for a couple more weeks, and we wouldn't see them for a few. And then they would this back and forth. And the entire time they're in spiritual turmoil. And all of a sudden, they went through this season where they were just there every week. And in an unlikely scenario, my wife and I were leading worship one week, and my wife saw them down there, and the service was over, and everything had shut down or whatever for the service being over. My wife turned around and looks at me and she goes, what do you think about talking to them about leading worship? And I'm like, she goes, She goes, I've been praying and been praying and been praying, and I kind of feel like that's who the Lord's laying on my heart. I'm like, yeah, talk to him. You know, she's the planner in our family. She's the organizer. And so it's like, if you feel like that's a direction God's leading you, then by all means. And so she went and talked to him. And their response, one, was not a immediate no. Their response instead was one of, you know, let us pray about it. Let us think about it. And so in the series of a couple of days, by then I was almost in panic mode as far as prayer was concerned, because I'd made pretty much all the phone calls I could, you know, pretty soon at this point in time, I was like, okay, do I need to call like Dave Johnson, the Lutheran, and say, hey, you know, what do you think about coming and preaching at a Baptist church for a few weeks, you know, or something? Hey, would you be down for that? You know, hey, just don't bring anything like, you know, not agreed upon in, you know, kind of thing. And like I was to that point of like, okay, that's going to make our people uncomfortable. And I don't want to do that. That's what I'm wanting to avoid. And so, man, I was like almost at a point of panic prayer. I don't know if you've ever been in that point of panic prayer.
Sure.
So I was at that almost point of like, okay, Lord, you got to show up because I don't know what to do. And he did. And he did by that same guy who had said, yeah, I can take the first 4 or 5 weeks, like him reaching out to me and saying, hey, I can take the summer. I can take it all, the whole thing. I'll be around. I can take the whole thing. I said, all 12 weeks? He goes, yep, all 12 weeks. Now, partway through 9 weeks into that 12 weeks, or 8 weeks into that 12 weeks, he had another personal thing come up, and he couldn't finish it out. But then that was another huge blessing is before I knew anything about it, the leadership in our church had already taken care of it. Like it was done. It was settled. Hey, we've got coverage for the next 3 weeks, and it was good, solid coverage. And it was like, cool, we're good. And that was the first then I heard about it was after it was already taken care of. And that was like, sweet. So one, I was guarded throughout, and so I would encourage anybody going on sabbatical to set up some guards for them, guardrails and guards for them. So my circumstance is a little bit odd in the sense that we live in the parsonage, which is on the church property, and my wife is the director of the preschool. It's a ministry of the church. So if I want to go see her in her office while I was on sabbatical, I'm technically going to work. And so one of the guards that had been set up for that was when I would show up, I would basically be told, like, don't look at your mailbox, don't look at anything on your desk. I'd pretty well kind of organized my desk before I went on as much as I organized my desk at all. Pretty much had organized my desk, but it was like, don't go in there and grab, you know, anything that's going to be work related or prep or anything else. And so people like who would call me on it, which I think is important.
As some folks who are kind of helping,
you know,
to own that together.
And so it's like I'd show up and like one of the times I showed up, one of the ladies in our church who's our treasurer and super supportive of me and my family and just awesome. Her and her husband are both just amazing. She walked into the office and like I was sitting there and she like walks in the office and she looks at like, what are you doing here? And like, that's not her personality. She's super gentle, super kind. And she like walks in and looks at me pretty hard and was like, what are you doing here? And I said, I just came down here to talk to my wife for a minute. I says, I will be a good boy and I will go back home. And so my encouragement would be to set up some of those types of, if you have a tendency. So if you're a person who has to have their hand in everything, then my encouragement would be set up some layers of protection to keep your hands out of those things. If you are, so basically do everything if you're a planner. One, I don't know how a planner's brain works because I'm not one. To watch my wife's brain work, and she's a super planner. Like she's getting ready to go to a conference next week in Tennessee, and like she's already got all of her breakouts scheduled. This is the breakouts I'm going to go to on each given day. This is the time frames that those run from this time to this time. She's got the app that's connected to the event. There's a Hova or whatever app that's connected to the event, and she's like engaged in little threads of conversations to do with the thing, you know, like all of that, and every bit of that as she talks about it, I'm just sitting there going, why?
Right.
Because for me, the enjoyment would be, even if I was going to go to it, would be the enjoyment for me would be to show up and be like, cool, let's figure out what we're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for her, that's stressful. For me, that's freeing.
Yeah.
Because then I can change my mind, too. I can just be like, I'm not letting anybody down. I'm not disappointing, discouraging, upsetting anybody by being like, you know, yeah, no, I was going to go there, but I think I'm going to go there now.
Yeah.
And go. I'm going as well, but I'm going on vacation.
Yeah.
So, because that was the other thing that I came back to, was one of my first things that when I came back was our leadership saying, hey, it's great that you're back from your 12 weeks of sabbatical. Remember, you also have 3 weeks of vacation you're going to need to burn between now and the end of the year.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it's encouraging to hear a congregation so supportive of that. And,
you know,
you would hope that is...
Our congregation has been, and I won't just say for sabbatical, I will say I've had, like, personally a tough about 5 years. Like really hard emotionally and spiritually hard 5 years. Like really hard. Dealt with a lot of issues, and my anxiety just out of control and at times and stuff like that. And I have received nothing but love, nothing but encouragement, nothing but helpful, nothing but even with folks and from folks that don't understand it, because you know you got people that deal with certain things, and you've got people that don't understand those things.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a person who deals with anxiety and you're talking to a person who doesn't, who they just don't, one, you can't fathom that someone doesn't deal with it, and two, the person who doesn't deal with it can't fathom what it's like to deal with it. And it's not always easy to empathize. It's not always easy to turn around and be like, wow, that must be really hard.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, God has blessed me with God's blessed me with a congregation that all I discovered through 10 weeks of not going to church during my 12 weeks of sabbatical, part of what I discovered partway through that whole thing was all I want to do is worship with the body of Christ that I belong to. Like that's the only place I want to go.
Yeah.
And that has nothing to do with, man, I got friends in town that I know do a great job with their church.
Yeah.
And do a great job of communicating the gospel. And do a great job handling the word. I know they do. And I love them for it.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
Because that's not my church.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was actually a massive encouragement. Was just like, no, I want to go to my church.
Yeah.
So 10 of the 12 weeks on sabbatical, I didn't go to church. One of the weeks I went to our church, and the other, we were up in Ellensburg where I grew up.
Yeah.
And we went to my church I grew up in.
Yeah.
And even there, it was fun, it was good worship, good message. The pastor, who's my pastor, still at that church, been there 30 years, who's been a great model of longevity for me, and a great model of longevity in the midst of not always being treated with the same level of compassionate care and love that I have been shown, including by my own family.
Yeah.
Which is hard.
Yeah.
To have them be like, well, he went on sabbatical like 12 years ago and he wants to go on another one. And it's like, why is that so? I mean, you've got a pastor who has served you. The average amount of time a pastor serves a church is 3 years.
Yeah.
You realize why that is? Like, him and I had a conversation about it during my sabbatical.
Yeah.
Of like, you know, he's like, yeah, he goes, what I have found that most pastors really end up doing is they take their sabbatical by quitting and going to another church or quitting
Right.
ministry as an entirety. And like, they usually take a few months break between when they leave this one and start the next one. And they go, so they do their sabbatical different. One of the things that I would say to a pastor and was an encouragement to realize, I guess I would say, for myself, was sabbatical is a gift of longevity. So it's a blessing of longevity. And so, you know, I've talked to a lot of pastors who've like, oh, I've never been on sabbatical. It's like, cool. How long? What's the longest you've ever been at a church? You talk to guys who've been pastoring for 20 years, and they're like, you know, what's the longest you've been at a church? Well, you know, 4 years, 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think I'm beginning to see the pattern of the problem of why you've never gotten a sabbatical. You've never gotten a sabbatical because the whole pattern of sabbatical is every 7 years, and you've never spent 7 years somewhere.
Yeah.
And so one is that I would see, and my encouragement would be for the pastor that is like, can't even imagine staying somewhere for 7 years and what that torture that must be, is to realize that it's not always torture. It's not never, because for some it is. Like I read all the time of pastors who, I mean, I read, or part of a cohort that yesterday there was not one of the guys who was part of the cohort, but a friend of one of the guys who's on the cohort who his church is having financial problems, and their literal first point of discussion was, okay, cool, well, if we cut the pastor's salary, that'll help our financial situation. And it's like, do you realize how unhealthy that approach is? I'm not saying completely unnecessary,
Sure.
but like, dang,
Yeah.
like that's your first point, where my experience has been completely the opposite of that.
Yeah.
My first point is me going to the church and saying, hey, do I need to go get a job and work do this bivocationally? And for them, and for my church to come back and be like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Like, we will do whatever we need to do, go wherever we need to go, you know, sell whatever we need to sell, or do whatever to make sure that we don't have to do that. Now, is there potential points of pride in that? Absolutely. But it also makes you as a pastor feel very, very secure and very, very loved and very, very cared for. Because like for me, I know that it's not because I don't challenge them. It's not because I urge comfort and relaxation and just, you know, stay where you're at, do what you're doing, you're fine. But so my thing is kind of a final thing that I would say to any pastor in the point of sabbatical. The main thing I would say is that sabbatical is a gift of longevity. And the second thing that I would say is, if you already know of things that you love to do that feed you, that are not part of your normal day-to-day rhythms as a pastor, then make those the focal point of your sabbatical. So where your sabbatical is a pattern, or you develop in it a rhythm of being fed.
Yeah.
If you don't know what that is,
joy in there too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what those things are, and that's where I was at. I had forgotten what those things were to me. If you don't know what those things are, then make at least a portion of your sabbatical a pattern of learning what feeds me. And that may mean you have to, I would almost call it, experiment with what feeds me. What does feed me? What does encourage? What do I find enjoyable? And so, like, we road tripped literally all the way across the country, my son and I. Our son and I. I mean, literally. Grants Pass, we left Grants Pass. We drove to Bishop, California. From Bishop, California to Page, Arizona. From Page, Arizona to Amarillo, Texas. From Amarillo, Texas to Little Rock, Arkansas. From Little Rock, Arkansas to Spring Hill, Tennessee. From Spring Hill, Tennessee to Asheville, North Carolina. From Asheville, North Carolina to Richmond, Virginia. From Richmond, Virginia to accidentally ended up in D.C., because we were trying to go to Arlington and took a wrong turn, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I guess we're driving into Washington, D.C. The only way we knew that is the bridge we were crossing, the Lincoln Memorial, was right there, and it was like, that's the Lincoln Memorial. Like, I guess we're driving into D.C. Had no idea, no concept of an idea. And and then leaving Quantico, and so driving, when it was all said and done, by the route that we took, driving pretty close to 4,000 miles.
Yeah.
One of the things I discovered is we did all of that. If I hadn't had somewhere I needed to be back, or something I needed to be back for within a shorter amount of time, had I the choice to make, I would have extended the rental car time and changed the delivery date of where I'm dropping that car off, and I would have driven all the way back across the country by a different route. Absolutely, hands down, without question. To this day, I think to myself, of like, that would have been better. And we went to Mexico. I got back from road trip. We went to youth camp, which my wife was obligated to serve at, and so therefore I went ahead and kept my obligation to serve there, which is why I couldn't road trip back across the country. Went and served at youth camp for 5 days, came home from that, basically did our laundry, repacked, and flew to San Diego and drove into Mexico. And spent 9 days in Mexico, including during the hurricane as it came up the Baja and into Southern California. And then came home. And so for me, what I would say in all of that was I loved every minute of that.